What's wrong with that?
I was just worried about your response.
You've done a brilliant job, mate. Brilliant job.
No one saw it coming. Not the loyal viewers who tuned in every week to find peace in the slow rhythm of restoration. Not the BBC executives who proudly called the show a national treasure. And certainly not the people who believed that the repair shop was built on unshakable friendship and trust. Beneath the gentle smiles and calm conversations about cherished heirlooms, something deeper was taking place. Something that quietly shifted the foundation of one of Britain's most beloved television families. While the cameras captured laughter, craftsmanship, and moments that could bring anyone to tears, there was a quiet tension building just off-screen. And when it finally surfaced, even those closest to the team were stunned. It wasn't an accident or an argument over creative direction. It was a confession, one that Steve Fletcher himself would later confirm. And it had everything to do with Jay Blades, the man whose warmth had become the very face of the repair shop. The repair shop didn't begin as a cultural phenomenon. It began as a quiet, almost humble idea. When the first episode aired on March 27, 2017, it was just another entry in the BBC Two lineup, a daytime show with a simple premise and an even simpler setting. But the moment viewers stepped into that workshop, surrounded by soft light streaming through old windows and the gentle hum of tools at work, something clicked. Produced by Ricochet, the same company behind other heartfelt British series, it aimed to celebrate craftsmanship, history, and human emotion. It wasn't about competition or fame. It was about people. The concept was disarmingly pure. Take broken but beloved objects, family treasures, personal relics, reminders of lost loved ones, and restore them not for profit, but for love. And behind every repair was a story, one that often revealed more about life, loss, and legacy than anyone expected from a daytime show. From its earliest days, the repair shop felt different. The workshop wasn't a glossy studio. It was set at the Weald and Downland Living Museum in Singleton, West Sussex, a place that looked frozen in time, where every wooden beam seemed to hold echoes of history. The backdrop gave the show a kind of spiritual calm, a sense that what was being repaired wasn't just a chair or clock or toy, it was a fragment of someone's soul. And in the middle of it all stood Jay Blades, with his familiar flat cap, broad grin, and voice that could turn even the hardest story soft. Jay wasn't an actor or a television personality in the traditional sense. He was a craftsman, a furniture restorer with a natural empathy that made people open up. He didn't just ask about the item, they shared their lives with him. His compassion became the emotional heartbeat of the show. But as the repair shop grew, so did the expectations. And not everyone inside the workshop was comfortable with how much the attention began to focus on one man. Steve Fletcher had been part of the series from the very beginning. A master clockmaker, he came from a long line of craftsmen, his family's trade reaching back over a century. His steady hands and quiet demeanor made him a natural fit for the show's tone. Viewers loved him for his patience, for the way he treated each timepiece like a living thing, capable of breathing again under his care. His relationship with his sister, Susie Fletcher, also captured hearts. Two siblings, reunited after decades apart, sharing their talent and gentle humor in front of the cameras. They represented everything the show was supposed to be about: authenticity, kindness, and respect for heritage. But behind that calm surface, the growing spotlight on Jay was starting to cast long shadows. By the time the show moved from BBC Two to BBC One, it had become a national institution. Ratings soared, social media exploded with praise, and the team found themselves invited to events, award shows, and morning programs. In 2023, the repair shop won the National Television Award for Best Daytime Show, an honor that confirmed its place in the public's heart. But inside the workshop, some felt things were changing. What had started as an ensemble, where every expert shared the same space and the same love for the craft, was becoming something else. The narrative was increasingly centered on Jay. The promos, the headlines, the interviews, Jay was the face of it all. Some fans noticed. Comments began to appear online. "Where's Steve? We don't see him as much anymore. Why does it feel like Jay's show now?" For a program built on teamwork, that shift didn't go unnoticed behind the scenes either. Steve Fletcher, ever the professional, kept his focus on his work. He avoided drama, stayed out of gossip, and continued to show up for every filming day with the same quiet dedication. But in interviews, subtle hints began to surface. He spoke about how the dynamic on set had changed as the show grew in scale, about how fame could alter people's behavior, even unintentionally. Those remarks didn't make headlines at first, but over time, fans began to sense an undercurrent. And then came the moment no one saw coming. Several episodes were quietly pulled from BBC rotation. No explanation, no announcement, just gone. Around the same time, Jay Blades disappeared from public appearances, canceling events and stepping back from media. The tabloids speculated endlessly. Some claimed there had been disagreements about creative control. Others whispered about personal struggles. And then, in a candid interview, Steve Fletcher finally broke his silence. He didn't make accusations. He didn't dramatize. But his words were enough to confirm what many had suspected, that there were tensions behind the scenes, and that fame had tested the very foundation of the workshop's unity. "It's hard," Steve said softly. "When you start something together and it grows bigger than anyone imagined, it changes you. It changes how people see you. It changes how you see yourself." He never mentioned Jay directly, but the message was clear. Something between them had shifted. The camaraderie that once defined the repair shop had been strained by success, and yet Steve's tone wasn't bitter. It was reflective, even protective. He seemed to suggest that no one was to blame, that it was simply the price of sudden fame in a world not built for it. To understand the gravity of Steve's words, it's important to remember what made their partnership so meaningful. Jay Blades and Steve Fletcher weren't just co-workers. They were, in many ways, opposites that balanced each other perfectly. Jay brought charisma and warmth. Steve brought precision and calm. Together, they gave the show its dual energy, emotion and craftsmanship, heart and skill. Their on-screen friendship became symbolic of everything people wanted to believe about British television, that honesty and collaboration still mattered. Which is why, when Steve spoke about changes and distance, fans were deeply unsettled. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was confirmation that the show's quiet magic had been touched by something real and perhaps irreversible. But to his credit, Jay Blades didn't shy away for long. After weeks of speculation, he returned to social media with a statement that caught everyone's attention. He didn't deny that things had been difficult. He didn't pretend nothing had happened. Instead, he wrote about mental health, exhaustion, and the pressure of representing something bigger than himself. He thanked his fellow artisans and called them the soul of the repair shop. For many, that was his way of acknowledging that perhaps in the whirlwind of success, the focus had strayed too far from the team and too much toward one man. The post was heartfelt and raw, and it softened public opinion. But for Steve Fletcher, the experience left a mark. He would later describe it as a reminder that fame and humility rarely coexist for long without effort. The repair shop continued, of course. The team returned, the workshop doors opened again, and the stories kept coming. But something had changed in the way viewers saw it. There was now an awareness, a realization that even in a place built to fix the broken, people could break too. And perhaps that was why the show remained powerful, because it mirrored life. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. In the following months, Steve became more open about what he valued most: authenticity. He emphasized how the real magic of the repair shop was never about who was in front of the camera. It was about the people behind the repairs, the memories being restored, the connections being mended quietly between tears and smiles. And as he spoke, fans began to see him not just as the quiet craftsman in the corner, but as one of the moral anchors of the show. Still, the rumors never fully disappeared. Some viewers claimed they sensed tension during certain episodes, brief glances, awkward silences. Others insisted the team had moved past it completely. The truth, as Steve would later admit, was somewhere in between. The repair shop had always been a mirror of the human experience, and humans, no matter how kind or talented, are complicated. What mattered most, he said, was respect, and in that sense, He and Jay had never lost it for each other. They might not always see eye to eye, but they understood each other in ways only people who've shared that kind of journey can. It's like any family, Steve once said. You argue, you drift, but in the end, you remember why you started. That line struck a chord with fans because it perfectly captured why the show continued to matter. The repair shop was never just about restoration, it was about forgiveness, about second chances, about understanding that what's valuable isn't always what's perfect. And perhaps that's why Steve's quiet confirmation of the rumors didn't tarnish the show's legacy. It deepened it. It made the team human again. For years, people had watched them heal other people's pain. Now they were seeing them confront their own. It was uncomfortable, but it was honest. And in the strange way that truth often works, it made the audience love them even more. The weeks following Steve Fletcher's quiet confirmation rippled through the world of British television like a whispered confession that somehow everyone heard. Fans who had grown used to the familiar rhythm of soft music, whirring tools, and heartfelt stories now watched with new eyes. Each episode of The Repair Shop carried an unspoken tension, as if beneath every repaired trinket and every heartfelt thank you, there were threads of something more fragile holding the team together. Yet in the midst of all that speculation, the show carried on. Viewers didn't abandon it. If anything, they became even more devoted, sensing that behind the gentle facade, real people were trying to navigate something far more complicated than any broken heirloom. Jay Blades, meanwhile, seemed to take Steve's quiet honesty as a turning point. Rather than retreat into silence, he did something few television personalities dare to do. He opened up. In an interview that aired later that year, Jay spoke with a vulnerability that caught many off guard. When something becomes bigger than you ever imagined, he said softly, you can lose sight of what you started it for. You get pulled in every direction, press, charity events, interviews, and before you know it, the workshop doesn't feel like home anymore. It feels like work. For fans who had followed his rise from humble furniture restorer to national icon, it was a startling confession. Jay wasn't angry and he wasn't defensive. He was simply admitting that fame had changed him and that it had tested friendships in ways he hadn't anticipated. Steve Fletcher watched that interview privately. Later, he would say that it felt both painful and healing to hear those words spoken aloud. In his own way, he had already accepted that what had happened between them wasn't betrayal, it was human frailty. Jay's heart has always been in the right place, Steve told a journalist not long after. He just got caught up in something bigger than any of us. That single sentence seemed to diffuse months of speculation. Suddenly, what had been painted as a feud became something deeper, a story about endurance, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of long-lasting respect. Inside the Weald and Downland Museum, life slowly returned to a familiar rhythm. Cameras rolled once more, but now the atmosphere on set had changed. According to crew members, Jay and Steve began working together again, not pretending nothing had happened, but acknowledging it through small, unspoken gestures, a nod, a smile, a shared laugh over a stubborn repair. It wasn't theatrical reconciliation, it was real, quiet healing, and perhaps that's what made it powerful. The Repair Shop, a show about restoring what's broken, had now become its own metaphor. The very people who taught the world that every scratch tells a story were now living proof of it. By 2024, something remarkable happened. Both Jay and Steve began appearing together in interviews again, this time with a new tone, wiser, gentler, more grounded. They spoke not about the rumors, but about resilience. Jay, in particular, emphasized how the team's bond had grown stronger through the challenges. We've been through things that'll never make it to air, he said. But that's what makes us family. We fix things for a living, and sometimes that means fixing ourselves. It was an understated but profound acknowledgement that the cracks in their friendship had, in a way, mirrored the very stories they helped tell on screen. Meanwhile, Steve's role within the Repair Shop began to quietly evolve. Though he had always been the soft-spoken craftsman in the corner, audiences began to notice how much heart he brought to each restoration. His patience with nervous guests, his careful explanations, his smile when a clock came back to life, these were moments that made him a steady presence. For many viewers, he represented the show's moral core. As social media filled with comments praising his authenticity, the BBC reportedly took notice. Producers began highlighting more of his work, showing the delicate precision and deep respect he brought to every project. In a sense, the public reaffirmed what the show's original spirit had always been about: humility, care, and the human connection behind every object. Jay and Steve may have taken different paths in handling fame, but their journeys were bound by the same passion: to keep the art of restoration alive. Off-screen, Jay continued his charity work, focusing on helping underprivileged youth learn trades. Steve, on the other hand, started mentoring young apprentices interested in horology, passing down a craft that fewer and fewer people practiced. Both men were, in their own quiet ways, preserving something that technology could never replace: the human touch. And though their friendship had weathered storms, it endured, steady, imperfect, and real. But even as the show settled into this new phase, another surprise awaited fans. During a live special recorded for the BBC's anniversary celebration of the repair shop, Steve made an unexpected statement. Standing beside Jay, surrounded by the familiar glow of the workshop, he looked out at the audience and said, "I think what keeps people watching isn't what we fix. It's that they can see we're still trying to fix ourselves." It was a rare moment of candor in a show built on subtlety, and the audience erupted in applause. Jay nodded beside him, visibly emotional. It wasn't a confession or an apology. It was an acknowledgement that the beauty of their work came not from perfection, but from perseverance. Behind that moment was a story few outside the team knew. In the months leading up to that special, Steve and Jay had spent hours talking about the past, about the weight of expectations, about the kind of men they wanted to be in their 60s. Steve, at 63, had reached a point in life where he valued peace over pride. Jay, nearing the same stage, admitted he was learning to slow down and appreciate what mattered most. They realized that the repair shop wasn't just a show. It had become a symbol of connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Their friendship, tested and tempered, reflected that same truth. For the fans who had followed the rumors for months, Steve's public words that day were both confirmation and closure. The rumors were true in the simplest sense. Yes, there had been tension. Yes, success had changed things. But there had also been forgiveness, growth, and understanding. In an industry known for ego and rivalry, they had chosen honesty instead. And in doing so, they preserved not just their bond, but the heart of the show itself. In interviews that followed, Steve continued to reflect on what the experience had taught him. "You can't mend everything with tools," he said in one conversation. "Sometimes you mend things with silence, with time, or just by showing up again." His words resonated far beyond the show's audience. They spoke to anyone who had ever watched something precious in their life crack under pressure and who had struggled to piece it back together. Jay, for his part, echoed the sentiment. "I think people forget that we're just people too," he said. "We don't have scripts in real life. We make mistakes. We fall out. But we also come back because that's what families do." Over time, the narrative shifted. What had once been framed as conflict became a lesson in humility and endurance. The repair shop itself seemed to evolve with its cast, subtly embracing a new sense of maturity. The episodes grew more reflective, the conversations deeper. There was less emphasis on spectacle and more on meaning. In one particularly moving episode, Steve worked on a century-old clock that had belonged to a family separated during wartime. As he restored it, he spoke quietly about time, loss, and reconciliation. "Sometimes," he said, "you fix something not to make it perfect, but to remember what it's been through." The line was unscripted, but it captured everything the audience had come to feel about both the show and its people. The BBC, aware of how deeply the show had connected with viewers, began producing companion specials, episodes that explored not just the restorations, but the personal journeys of the craftsmen themselves. One of the most touching segments focused on Jay and Steve's working relationship, tracing how it had evolved from cautious colleagues to trusted partners. Watching them share laughter again, teasing each other the way they used to, viewers felt a sense of closure. It wasn't the glossy resolution of television drama. It was the quiet, imperfect healing of real life. By 2025, The Repair Shop was still going strong, now spanning over 400 episodes and multiple spin-offs across the world. Yet its core remained untouched. The workshop in Sussex, with its wooden beams and sunlight filtering through the windows, still symbolized a sanctuary from the noise of modern life. And there, among the familiar faces, Steve Fletcher continued to work, measured, patient, and unwavering. When asked recently about the rumors that once surrounded him and Jay, Steve simply smiled. "We've both said what needed to be said," he replied. "Now we just get on with the job." It was perhaps the most fitting conclusion anyone could imagine. No grand speeches, no dramatic fallout, just two men, weathered by experience, quietly returning to their craft. For a show about mending what's broken, there could be no better ending. And yet, in a way, the story doesn't end there. Because The Repair Shop has always been about more than just repairs, it's about legacy. The legacy of care, patience, and respect that people like Steve Fletcher have spent their lives preserving. At 63, Steve represents not just a master of his trade, but a reminder of what craftsmanship truly means: commitment, compassion, and the courage to keep going even when things don't go as planned. And Jay, despite the turbulence, remains the bridge between those stories and the audience who loves them. Together, they continue to prove that even when relationships crack, even when fame distorts, what's real will always find its way back. So when Steve finally confirmed the rumors, it wasn't the scandal people expected. It wasn't about blame or rivalry. It was about truth, quiet, humble, and redemptive. He confirmed that yes, fame can test friendships, that yes, even the most sincere teams can struggle. But he also confirmed something far more powerful, that what's built with honesty can survive anything. And that, perhaps, is the greatest restoration The Repair Shop has ever achieved. Because in a world obsessed with perfection, Jay Blades and Steve Fletcher reminded everyone that the cracks are what make things beautiful. They're what make us human. And sometimes the most important repair isn't of a clock or a chair, it's of the bond between two people who, despite everything, still believe in fixing what matters.